Hi, this is Dr. Sezin Zengin. Welcome to Agri TV once again. Today we are together with Professor Ellen Matthews from the Trinity College, Ireland, and we will be talking about the common agricultural policies of European Union. Very welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much.
First of all, I would like to ask that it's 2019 and then there will be new policies regarding to the common agricultural politics of European Union, and it's coming soon. It will be starting at 2020. What are the new expected proposal and what you want to tell us about that new common agricultural policies?
Well, I think the first thing is to put it in a historical context because it is going to be a further evolution of reforms to the European Union's agricultural policy, which have now been in place for almost 20 years. So many of your listeners will probably recall the European Union as a very protectionist union with high internal agricultural prices, protected from competition from exporters with high tariffs, and also using a lot of export subsidies to sort of dump our surpluses on world markets and causing a lot of problems for other exporting countries and also for importing countries because we were lowering the world market price. So about 25 years ago, this was also a very expensive policy for the European Union. So it began to change its policy from one of supporting the prices of farm products to supporting the income of farmers. And now we do this largely through what we call decoupled direct payments. So what it means is that farmers who are eligible, they receive a per hectare payment from their government.
And these policies are same for all over the European Union members.
Exactly.
States,
there are some differences in terms of the level of payment, but the idea of a per hectare payment which farmers can receive without any obligation to produce a particular commodity or indeed even to produce anything at all, which is a rather unusual characteristic, but it means it is completely decoupled from production. So this has been the policy now in place for, let us say, the last 10 years, but the European Union is facing a number of very significant challenges, particularly on the environmental and climate front. So on the environment, we still have problems with deterioration of water quality. We have problems with air quality, with ammonia emissions from intensive livestock units where you have a lot of cattle, for example, concentrated in the one area. And also in terms of emissions of greenhouse gases, so which is contributing to climate change. So in the last few years, the European Union has signed up, of course, like most other countries, to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and also to the Paris Agreement on climate change. So this new reform is driven by really two main motivations. One is to have a higher level of climate and environmental ambition. So we want to ask our farmers to do more
more environmental
for these environmental and to orient more of the subsidies that they get, link it more to these environmental objectives. So rather than just give it as a payment per hectare and with not so many obligations attached, but in future that farmers would be obliged, would be encouraged to do more, as you say,
so
for
these
environmental.
subsidies are going to become conditional on the environmental friendly
So
farmers.
this is one of the proposals that will be in the new reform. The other aspect, which is very important, is that the European Union is consisting of, we now have 28 member states. If the United Kingdom leaves, we will have 27 member states. But these member states cover very different agro-ecological zones, so very different types of agriculture from the Arctic Circle to the Mediterranean. And what the European Union wants to do is to give more responsibility to the member states to design their own policy. So we have discovered that having a policy which is uniform for all of these different countries, for all of these different farm structures, is not very efficient. So this is the second driver of this reform.
Okay, so each government will be able to set up their own strategic plan on agricultural developments.
This is the idea. But then you might ask, well, how do you have a common policy if every country is going to have their own plan? So there will be a number of safeguards to make sure that we do not have a lot of competition between the individual countries in terms of developing these plans. First of all, there will still be basic rules at the European Union level regarding the type of support which you can provide to farmers, and also the level of this support. So there will be limits on this. The other important point is that the European Union will measure the performance of countries against their plans.
Performance as the amount of production or productivity?
Not so much productivity. Each country, when they are drawing up their strategic plan, will have to identify what are the main challenges that they face. So it could be low farm income in some regions. It could be soil erosion in some regions. It could be high unemployment amongst young people in some regions, in some rural areas. So depending on the particular problems that they see, they will have to set some targets that they want to achieve.
And the subsidies will be
linked to those targets, exactly. So that there will be some monitoring and accountability to make sure that the member states stay on target with respect to their plans.
Okay. Let me ask you something. What is the budgetary concerns of Brexit on the European Common Agricultural Policies?
Well, the Common Agricultural Policy is largely financed through the European Union budget. There is some contribution from the individual member states, but most of it is coming through the European budget. So there will be a big impact of the departure of the United Kingdom, what we call Brexit, because the United Kingdom is actually the second biggest net contributor to the European budget. So it puts much more money into the budget than it takes out. Okay. So if the United Kingdom is now leaving, then there will be quite a big hole in the budget, which the other countries have to decide: are they going to put more money in themselves to cover this gap in the financing? Or are they going to reduce their expenditure? So there is a sort of compromise. What the European Commission has come forward with is a compromise. So they are proposing some reduction in the agricultural budget, but a lot of member states would like to keep it at the same level, so they are pushing back, and this is a debate which is still continuing and probably will not be the result will not be known until later in this year.
Okay. Let me ask you something about the effects on this, European common agricultural policies on the non-member states of European Union or the candidates such as Turkey. Is there any programs or plans to help or provide subsidies to the countries who are in the process of becoming European Union members?
Well, clearly the European Union is a major player in global trade. I would say it accounts for probably 15% of global exports and global imports. So any change in European Union policy is likely to have some impact on world market prices and therefore on other countries, whether they are exporters or importers. I would say that the first impact of the policy reform will probably be to because of the higher environmental standards that will be required of European farmers, the first impact will probably be to lower production compared to if we did not have the reform. So production may continue to increase because of technology and improved management and so on. But just looking at the impact of the reform, it will probably result in some higher costs for European farmers and therefore some lower production. So this will translate into maybe smaller exports from the European Union in the future or maybe larger import opportunities. I would not say these effects will be very big, but that would be the direction of the effect.
What about the policies including the non-European Union countries in that subsidy policies, especially the countries who are in the process of becoming European Union members?
Well, the support for these countries, for example, in terms of supporting rural development programs and so on, this will continue, I think. This will not really be affected by the internal reform of the European Union's policy. For a country like Turkey, which is a candidate country, of course, I am sure the officials in the Ministry of Agriculture will be looking at the changes and asking, should we also be trying to move in this direction? I think one of the possible longer-term effects of the change is that European farmers often feel that our governments are making heavy demands on them to raise their standard, for example, in food safety, but also in environmental impact. And then they see other countries who are able to export to the European Union. Maybe they do not have the same level of standards in their own legislation. So also at this conference where we are in these 2 days, I see some evidence that other countries are looking at how they need to raise their standards in order to keep their export market in the European Union. So I think this is another important effect for the non-EU countries, this raising of the standards in order to keep the access to the European Union market.
Okay, and let me ask you, do you think that the new European Union policies become more environmental conscious and also the climate conscious? Can we say that?
Well, this is certainly the intention of the European Commission in putting forward its proposal for the agricultural policy after 2020. What will happen now is that the political decision makers take over. So the proposal has been made, but it now must be discussed both by the governments of the individual member states and also by the European Parliament, which represents all of the citizens of the European Union. And we see already that there is some concern that because the budget for the agricultural policy will be less, there is some concern that maybe we are moving too fast and asking too much of our farmers. But then there are other voices that say, well, we have these problems. We are losing, our biodiversity is disappearing, our water quality is diminishing. We need to take action now, and therefore there is, some political groups will support strongly the need for this change. But this is a debate which is normal in politics, and we will have to wait to see which emphasis will be, which side, if you like, will be given the greater emphasis when the final result is known.
Okay, and let me ask you the current labor situation in farming in Europe. We all know that European Union use the highest, agricultural technologies, but still farming is labor intensive sector. What about the future of it, since Europe is getting older?
Yes.
The aging might affect. And what about the younger population's expectations from farming, or their, point of view about farming?
Yeah. Well, you have touched on another issue which is actually highlighted in the proposals for the next reform. You are absolutely right that the farming population in Europe is becoming older. We have probably only around 7% of farmers are under 35 years of age, and maybe 11% under 40 years of age. So there is a very much an imbalance towards older age groups. So the question is how to encourage what we call generational renewal, how to encourage more younger people into farming activity. And there are probably two ways to look at this. One argument is that we need to provide more financial support to younger farmers. So to give them, when they establish themselves on a farm, very often they need to modernize the farm, so they need to take out maybe a large loan and so on, and therefore one way to help younger farmers is to give them assistance in setting up when they are starting farming. My own view is that there is also an important issue simply in getting access to land, and here we might be creating some problems with the subsidy system that we have in the European Union, because older farmers may decide to stay on in farming, to remain in farming, because they can continue to get these subsidies, which are quite attractive. So
since also it's coupled currently, the larger land gets larger subsidies.
Yes, you have to be an owner of land in order to get the subsidy. So or a tenant to have leased the land. So you need to be a farmer. And if you stop to be a farmer, then you lose the subsidy. And in some countries where perhaps the level of pensions is not so high, it's not very attractive for a farmer to give up the subsidy, the agricultural subsidy, and to become a retired person. So they decide to stay on and to hold on to their land. And of course that makes it more difficult then for younger people to find land to start to farming. So
also it increases
the prices. I think
of
we
the
also
land.
need to look, it's important to give support to younger farmers, of course, but we also need to look at how we encourage the transfer of land from older people, so that there is enough land for these young people to farm on.
All right, and also there is a constant migration to Europe. I mean, from many different countries. What are the effects of those migrants? Do they work in agriculture, or provide, we can say that, less expensive labor force for farming?
Yeah, this is a very characteristic feature of European farming, that in terms of the salaried workforce, the hired workforce, in many countries, this is now provided by workers from outside. So in my own country, in Ireland, for example, the sector that is most affected would be the dairy sector, because it's quite labor intensive. You need to have somebody to help with the milking twice a day and so on. And in many cases, it is workers coming from the eastern part of Europe who are providing the labor. In Southern Europe, it is often people coming from outside Europe. So they are coming from North Africa and they are picking the tomatoes, picking the strawberries. And I would have to say, in many cases, their working conditions are very poor, and there is unfortunately evidence of exploitation, where people are not paid a fair wage, are not looked after properly, And this is something which I would like to see a lot more focus on in the future. Yeah.
Okay. And my last question, would you like to comment on another thing?
Oh, well, I suppose one of the issues for countries outside the EU is to what extent agricultural policy in the European Union can provide a model for their activities. And as I say, Europe, particularly after the Second World War, suffered from food shortages. So the big priority was to try to become self-sufficient, to increase food supply within the European Union. Actually, this was achieved quite quickly, and we became a sort of a net exporter. And as I say, we caused a lot of problems for non-EU countries because we dumped these exports, we subsidized these exports onto the world market. I think now I like this idea that we are using more of our support to farmers to encourage them to move into this into more environmentally and climate sensitive agricultural practices. And I think this is also a direction that many other countries need to go, because we see soil erosion in many countries, land degradation. All countries have the same issues in terms of trying to reduce
So European Union can become a model.
So I think that maybe looking at how the European Union has addressed some of these environmental challenges can be interesting for other countries outside the European Union.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Ellen Matthews. Today we were together with Professor Ellen Matthews from the Trinity College of Ireland. Thank you very much for watching us.